I see the video now. 8 seconds, 7, 6.
We're live.
Okay.
Hi there. Welcome to our live stream. This is our second live stream ever. So I hope you'll forgive us if we make a few technical mistakes, but hopefully should all run fine. I'm joined today with Jaime, who is disembodied at the moment, so you should be able to see me, but Jaime is voice only for this particular session. So I don't know if you're there, Jaime, and you want to say hello?
Hi everyone. Can you hear me, Paul?
I can hear you perfectly well.
Excellent.
So
cool. 40 people.
Yeah, 40 people and counting. So just to let you know a little bit about what this live stream's about, the idea is that we answer live, without a safety net, some of the questions that you've sent in to us in the week or so preceding the broadcast. So that way we can react more quickly to sort of the day-to-day questions that you're asking and the queries that you need answering. And it's also a really good way to share good practice, because quite often we get really interesting questions and we come up with solutions for those particular questions, but then they don't really go much beyond the person that asked the question. So this live stream, it's a way for us to share these things that we've passed on to maybe a small group of people to a much wider audience. And before we move into that sort of more technical part, I'm going to hand over to Jaime, who's just going to talk a little bit about some of the other things that are happening at iToo Software.
Thank you, Paul. Hi everyone. So now that we could chat with this, I think we did the first one of this a year ago. But now that we're keen on doing a monthly live stream with Q&A, and since this is the beginning of the year and the first one we are doing in the year, I thought it was a good occasion to update some of the things that we are planning for 2022. So as most of you know, there was 2 major releases for the plugins last year. That was ForcePack 7 and RailClone 5, which were highly successful. We are very proud of that work. So of course, we will go for minor releases on 2022 because those major versions have to last. I mean, we think that have to last around a year and a half. So what we have in mind for this year, so you saw with 7.3, which was released a few weeks ago, will be minor improvements. We want to work on the UX experience of the plugins, so we make your life easier, and we will be doing fixes and bugs. So that will be, of course, in addition to that, there will be compatible with Max 2023 plugins and free plugins as soon as Autodesk releases the final version. That's on the side for the plugins. On the assets, which is something that everyone keeps asking for, and improvements, we are keen on working this year on everything that has to do with the included assets for both plugins, especially for RailClone. We think that we have to revamp some of the libraries. Some other ones will be redone from scratch, so we'll be working on that. And of course, there will be more commercial libraries for 3D Garden and the Parametric library. In addition to that, content-wise, we know that you guys love Paul tutorials, so we will be working on the learning section of the website, so you guys can find those tutorials in an easier way. And in addition to that, we are planning, in fact, we already started on building big courses. We have a RailClone course that we have released a couple of chapters, and afterwards there will be a big ArchViz course. We want to cover the whole ArchViz pipeline obviously from our point of view. So you guys have a whole set of resources to look at. That's it, pretty much. Exciting 2022 ahead, and we are working on it. So all yours.
Thank you, Jaime, that's great. Just a few things just quickly. Just thank you to saying hi, everyone in the chat. So hello to people in Brazil and Ecuador and India. We've got our first question as well, which is about globe plants appearing dark in Corona. Is there a solution? Actually, on that one, your best bet is going to have to be to contact Globe Plants, because that's almost certainly some kind of shader issue. So I would ask them, and if there is a forest pack issue, then they'll contact us. But I imagine it's some sort of shader thing to do with globe plants. One thing that I would mention though that you can do is to use the color correct settings which are in the materials rollout in forest pack. So you could always lighten them up a little bit using that as a temporary measure, but I would contact globe plants. Another question quickly: since the release of RailClone 4 there have been no in-depth tutorials. Will there soon be any? There are effects. Looking forward to seeing depth about making doors and windows, please. So as Jaime just mentioned, we are just now starting a run of tutorials that are built around a whole course. So they're going from very basic at the moment for absolute beginners, and they'll go up through the new through the fundamentals of RailClone, through building facades and so forth, and right up to the new features of RailClone 5 in fact. And then from there we're going to continue building courses and additional tutorials. Also, this live stream, which is now a regular monthly thing, and you can see this is another source of additional tutorials too. Hello Trinidad and Tobago, hello Serbia, hello Bangladesh, good to have you here. Lovely. So let's start with the questions that we've been asked in the last few weeks since we announced this, and the first one I want to address is this question on how you can blend scattered objects with a surface more convincingly. So I think we've probably all seen this issue. If you've got like the base of a tree, for example, and it's contacting the ground, whether it's where it hits soil or grass or something like that, you get this kind of quite artificial line where just the two textures meet. And my usual trick there is to try and hide that with grass or something like that, but there is a trick you can do with shaders to help disguise that. So I'm going to show you that now. This is V-Ray, but it will equally work for any other renderer that supports a distance texture. So I'm going to switch to screen capture mode, and here we go. And you should be able to see, if I zoom in here, the problem. So this is without the shader effect applied, and you can see where this tree meets the mud, it's kind of a very hard line, and it's kind of more pronounced on the rocks in the background. You see this, you know, in reality some of this mud would splash up onto these rocks, the bottom of the tree, the earth would kind of accumulate there, and we'd see a much smoother transition. So what I would suggest that you could do, and I would only bother doing this in the foreground where you can really see these things, I wouldn't do it at all in the background, is to change the shaders slightly so that we can take the ground shader and apply it just to the bottom of the trunk or the rocks. Okay, so we're going to need a few things in order to do that. First of all, we're going to need the material editor, and we're going to need to take the texture for this tree, which is in the foreground here, out of Forest Pack. So you can see at the moment I'm in the geometry rollout, and I'm just going to pull this out of Forest Pack and into the material editor there. So here's my Forest Pack material, and please bear in mind that I didn't pick this multi-sub material directly from Forest Pack. I've actually found the source material, and that's the better way of doing things. So the other thing I want to do is to take the ground texture too. So I'm just going to pick that off of the actual ground surface, and that's here. And what I want to do is combine those two things. Now, just a quick note, this works much better if you're using triplanar mapping, because it's going to save me from having to kind of separately texture the bottom of this tree, and it means that the kind of texel density of the ground is going to be matched when it is applied to the bottom of the tree. So you'll see in this node here, for example, I'm using triplanar textures mapping, which saves me from having to manually UV wrap anything. I've also got on this ground texture here a V-Ray UVW randomizer with stochastic tiling on, so that you can't see any texture repetition. But that's sort of by the by for this particular approach. So what I'm going to do is basically blend these two together, and I'm going to do that by using a V-Ray. There we go, a V-Ray blend material, and there it is. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to replace the original tree material in Forest Pack and just drop that into there. Okay. Now I'm going to take the original tree material and I'm just going to put it in as the base, like so. And then I'm going to take the ground material and I'm going to put that in as the first coat, like so. Okay, so I've piped the whole multi-sub object material into there. There's no need to sort of worry about trying to find the particular trunk texture, although you could do it that way. I'm just trying to keep things simple in the event that I've got very complex materials. Now, in order to blend those, I want to come out of this blend input here, and I'm going to add a V-Ray distance texture. V-Ray distance texture here. Okay, so all so far so good, and actually default distance is probably okay. What I do need to change though is the far color and the near color, because what I want to do is to blend this in just where it's on the base here, and obviously that's the near color, so I want that to be white, not black. So what I'll do is I'll just take the white, drag it onto the black, and swap those around like that. So that solves that problem. Now all we need to do is to just come to here, to the V-Ray distance text objects, click on add, and add the surface. So I've just added that plane there. Okay, so now that's pretty much going to be blending between those two. And that will work as it is. I don't really need to do anything else. But one thing that I do like to do, especially on the rocks and big flat surfaces, is to kind of break that up a little bit. So at the moment, you're going to get a nice, very tidy, graduated fade all the way along the same distance, the same height around all the rocks and around the bark. So to avoid that, to make it a little bit more unruly and stepped, what I like to do is to come into the distance texture input slot here, distance texture, and then I'm just going to add a noise map there, just a standard noise map. So I'm just going to add a noise here and change it to fractal and make it quite small. So I'm going to go for 2. And I also like to increase the contrast a little bit, so I'm going to make the low 0.4 and the high 0.6, something like that. And what that's going to do is have the effect of kind of creating this kind of jaggedy, like I say, slightly more organic looking transition. Another thing I'll do though as well is, rather than have it going from white to black, I actually don't ever want it to disappear completely, so I would change the black so it's sort of more like a grey, and also so that it turns into full streaks, I would also change the tiling of the z-axis to something smaller, so that it kind of stretches out the texture on the z-axis, and you create again this more like streaked effect there. So with all those little transitions done, I'm not going to render it because it will slow my computer down while I'm streaming, but with all those transitions done, what you'll end up with is something like this. So if you can see in the background there, these rocks are blending in much better into the floor than would do otherwise. And the nice thing is it's fully procedural, right? If we move these rocks around, or we raise them up in the air a little bit to have more of the rock above ground or less of it, then this texture will just adapt. And the same's true of the tree. Look, so you can see the trunk here with its quite artificial transition. But then with this map applied, you can see it blends much more smoothly. It's just a quick hack really to get this stuff to fit together a little bit more nicely. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense, and I found that a particularly interesting question that we got asked, so I quite enjoyed trying to solve that one. So before we move on, Jaime, are there any questions there that should be answered?
Well, we have, can you please show how to make floors automatically when we make facade into array in RailClone?
Let me see if I tried.
And then we have
floors automatically when we make facade in a 2D array. I'm not sure I entirely understand that question.
So Asiful, if you can please.
Yeah, you might need to clarify that one a little bit, but I can certainly have a look. I've got a thing on floors in a minute to look at. Doors and parametric libraries for RailClone. Yeah, you've said that on the roadmap. That's good. And you've shared some tutorials. Fantastic. So nothing else? No? No. Okay, good. Okay, if you've got any questions about that technique, please ask them. I'll come back to them at the end of the next section. So the next one might be of interest to anyone who regularly needs to build large things like warehouses out of almost whole modular buildings, but this same technique can be applied to pretty much anything where you need to create this kind of array, which I'm about to show you. So this is a RailClone question, and basically the chap wants to create a warehouse which is conveniently, like I say, modular, but on a huge scale, and unusually, for the types of things we normally do with RailClone, each modular section of this warehouse, as you would imagine for a real-life construction, can't be scaled at all. So the kind of adaptive mode that we would normally use to kind of fit all the geometry together nicely can't be used. And the same on the X and the Y axis. So what we had to do, or what we wanted to do with this one, was to create a warehouse where instead of doing splines and using adaptive mode or setting a measurement, you just set the number of repetitions. Or it wanted to specify the number of repetitions for the warehouse. And I will show you how to set up that kind of thing now. So I'm just going to switch back to my screen capture and wait for this file to load. Kind enough to let me show the file as well. So thank you for that. I'll show you what we have to start with. So these are the pieces of the model. You can see it's a fully formed warehouse. It's just in multiple pieces. So we've got kind of corners, top, bottom, left and right. We've got the sides and middle sections, and then we've got separately at the back we've got the lorry bays. Okay, so they're a separate piece because it just fits together better that way. And this was the final style here, and you can see the scale of it. But like I say, it's set using X count and Y count, so I can easily just change the number of the warehouses using these parameters to change the size of this particular building. Okay, so I'm going to open up the style, and I'm just going to delete everything except the nodes really, and then segments, sorry, and then show you how to build it again from scratch. So I'm just going to take the segments over here and delete everything else. I'll keep those two. So hopefully most people on here don't need to be explained how you would import segments. So I'll just leave those there because that saves a bit of time. No one wants to watch me import a bunch of segments. To build this array then, so we'd add a 2D array like so. And normally, of course, you'd use XY spline there, or you would set the size here. But we want to derive the size from these pieces of geometry automatically. So what we're going to do is to use the size of the geometry and export it from the segments, and then use it in a couple of equations to set the size. So we'll just wire this up first of all. So let me set size sort of 20 meters by 20 meters, just so I've got something to work with. I'll wire it in the start segment. So you can see there's the start segment of this array here. I'm going to wire the end into the other end, and you can see I've set the size so small it's not long enough yet, so I'll just make this a little bit bigger. So I've got a little bit of a gap in between. Okay, so you can see I've basically wired something in at the start, something in at the end. No big deal. What was that, 187? I'll make it 100 meters. So we've got a little bit going that way too. Right, good. And now I'm going to just add the corners, right? So you know the 2D array hopefully, or if you don't, you're about to. We've basically able to target several parts of a 2D array. So I can target the start and the end bottom, and the start and the end at the top, and that's what these segments here are. You can see the geometry over here. So I'm going to start with the start bottom, end bottom, start top, end top. Okay, so you can see it's swapped in those pieces of geometry there and there. Easy enough so far. Now I've also got segments for the top and the bottom, so these fit in between these corners, so you can see there's a gap here and here, so I'll just add those. So we've got top up there, bottom fills in down there, and all that remains now is to fill in between, and that's what the default input is for. It basically fills in whatever's left between those segments. So there we go. So that fills in your array. Now a couple of things you should note. If I come into these segments, you'll notice slice is turned off. So instead of this geometry being sliced, you can see it's just overlapping at the moment. And we want to avoid that. We want this array to always be the right size for the warehouse pieces that we've got. So we can do that, like I say, using some expressions. And what we're going to do is to set a count. So I've got a couple of parameters down here already, and these are what's called numeric nodes. You can see them over here on the right. And these basically show up as parameters in this parameters rollout down here. So you'll see immediately if I add a new one of these, I get a new parameter down here that I can control. No need to do anything, it's automatically exported down there. That's all I've done with these and given them a name. Okay, so it's logical, right, that if I say control the size of this on the x-axis, I want to do a count, which, and this is a count for the internal pieces, by the way, which is going to be basically the size of the start, the size of the end, plus the size of the middle section multiplied by this count value. That's all it's going to be. So we can do that quite easily. We can take an arithmetic node. It's already in add mode, add operation. So we want to take, and we'll take the start segment. We're going to take the size of that on the x-axis. See, it's got x size there. And I'm going to take the end, which is this one over here. I'm going to take that on the x-axis too. And then I'm going to take the x size of the default segment, that's the one that's in between, and I want to multiply that by this count value. So arithmetic node, I'll take a second one. I'm going to take this x size, this count value, and this time I want to change the operation. So instead of being add, I want it to be multiply, like so. And then I want to add those two things together, like so. Okay, so this basically is saying add together the size on the x-axis of the start and the end, take the x size of this default segment, which is in the middle here, multiply it by the count, add those two together, and this is the output of that equation. So what do I want to do with that? Well, I want to set the size of the array. There isn't an input for that, so in order to get one, I'll click on it, right click, and then export parameters. And here you can export nearly any parameter from the array. In this case, it's going to be x size. Hit OK. Wire that up to there. And now I should get, as you can see, only whole segments, because it's exactly the size of the start and the end plus 5 default pieces in between. And you can easily change it by changing that. Then you do the same thing basically for the y-axis. Instead of doing that all again, I'm just going to copy this and paste it, and then just change the inputs. So this time I'm going to take the y size of the top and the bottom. So this is from the side now. Look, so we've got the y size of the top up here and the bottom down here. I'm going to pipe those into the first one, just add them together. I'm going to change the x count parameter to the y count parameter in that one, and I'm going to find the default segment, which is up here somewhere, and this time I want to multiply that by the size of it on the y axis. So I'll just take that and put it into there instead. Why is nothing happening? Because I haven't wired it to the generator yet, that's why. So here's our generator. So you've only got the x size exported. Right click on it, export parameters, y size, OK, and connect that to there. And now I've got control for the y-axis too. Okay, so that's pretty much how you can use just basic arithmetic to set the size of the array instead of having to enter it manually. And you can be sure that everything snaps together because it's actually derived its measurements from the size of the actual geometry itself and the bounding box of the geometry. Now, of course, one thing I didn't show there was how to get these outputs because they were already there, but that's easily done. You just right click on any segment node or any node actually and go to export attributes. And you can export the size on the X, Y, or the Z axis from any node in the array. And then you can use those in your equations there, like so. So that's pretty much that. There was an extra bit at the back here, which, yeah, we might as well carry on and do that. Were there any questions about that particular part, Jaime, that need answering?
Not exactly, but we have a bunch of questions.
Other
Keyframes
questions?
animation, yeah. Keyframes
I'll come back to those.
Academy.
Sorry, I'll come back to those just after doing this then, and then
Sorry.
if that's okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Right, so this time then, I've got a new linear generator because there's basically this row of kind of doors at the back for lorries, and the reason they're separate is, as you can see, they've got taller double doors at the start and the end, and then this one repeats in between, and because they kind of overlap on one side and don't on the other, it doesn't sort of easily fit into this breakdown of the geometry, so it makes more sense to separate it and handle it separately. So what we'll do is we'll use this linear generator, and we'll just wire these up. So this is easy enough. We'll just wire this to the default and the start. This is the double doors down here, and the start and the end. And now we've already got some measurements for our size that we can use to make sure these things scale together. So here, for example, I've got X size. I can use that to set the size of this array. So I'm going to export the parameters, go to geometry, X size, OK, and then wire that up like that. Now that is already created somewhere. If I just hide that generator, you should see it. There it is. But it's at the front of the array. It started at the you know, where the RailClone's pivot is, as you'd imagine. So what it needs to happen is we need to move it to the back of the array up there instead. And basically we can use the Y size for that. So we can export parameters, and in here you'll see there's a Y offset parameter. Y offset. If I click on that and wire up the Y size, we'll move it to the back of the array here. Good. Except of course that there's an overhang on the roof, so that measurement doesn't quite work. So what we need to do is just add a little adjustment just to pull it back in, so it's always moved from here to the other side of the array minus an offset back again. And again, we can just use our arithmetic node. No need to get into expressions or anything, just our arithmetic node. Pop that into there, and I'm going to set it to subtract. And this time, instead of using a numeric node which will export to the parameters, I'm going to use a constant which doesn't. This just lets me add a number to the graph that I just know I'm never going to need to edit, because this value is never going to change. So I'll set it to scene units and wire it into there. And now as I increase this, you'll see this slides back until I get it into position. Like so, it's kind of eyeballing it now. So that's all pretty good so far, except for the fact that it extends right to the edges of the building, and we want it to finish about here. So what I'll do there, again, this distance is never going to change, so I don't need to kind of create a parameter or anything for it. What I'll do instead is go into the generator, into the limits tab, and there are a couple of padding settings in here that actually not so many people use, I don't think. These basically allow you to offset the start and the end of an array. You've got two of these for a linear array like this, one start and the end, and on a 2D array you can do top and bottom too. And what I can do with these is just slide the geometry so that it starts a little bit later. Now it's not offsetting, it's not moving the whole thing along, it's just shortening the graph, or shortening the spline, sorry, by this distance. And obviously if I wasn't live streaming, I'd spend a bit more time setting that value up so that it snaps together exactly, but for now I'm just going to leave it like that. I do the same thing at the end here and snap it into there. Okay, I'll just change the mode to adaptive so only whole segments are used. Okay, and there we go. So you can see those are working at the back there as a separate array, and if you change the Y count, you can see that it moves with it and stays a set distance from the front of the array. One thing I just mention here is that in order for this to sort of work like this, running from the pivot position, you do have to have free object turned on in the style rollout. If I turn that off, you might find it falls apart a little bit. In this case, yeah, see I've lost the back there. In fact, it's probably at world origin somewhere like that. So in order for everything to start from this point, this pivot point, and be movable and rotatable, turn on free object, and then that works fine. So that was how we created the warehouse in this particular situation. I think that's probably a useful set of tricks that you can use for all kinds of other things as well. Great. So let's have a look, see what questions we've got.
So we have this one from Keyframes Animation Academy in India. Can we do tree animation like GrowFX in ForestPack?
Well, you can't create the animation in ForestPack because that requires quite specialized software that understands the structure of the trees and that kind of thing. So you would need something like GrowFX or SpeedTree or even Tyflow, I think, can do it to create the animation itself. But once you've created that animation, you can control it and randomize it in ForestPack in a variety of ways, either by randomly offsetting it or controlling it using black and white maps if you had growth animations and that sort of thing. But you couldn't actually create them in ForestPack. No.
Okay.
I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. This next one from Lars Knapman. That's a tricky one. I'm working with some driving cars that this might be one for the next live stream. I've got the wheels running convincingly, but I have to work out a way to get the front wheels to follow the path. I've actually tried to do this before, and the kind of rack and pinion steering, if that's what it's called, I can't remember, that cars use means that they turn in a very specific way that is quite hard to simulate without proper rigging tools. I will take a note of that one because that would be really interesting to see if it's possible, and look back at my old scene files and see how far I got. So maybe watch this space for that one. Let's move on.
Show us your favourite macros. Yeah, fair enough. I would like to do some more tutorials, sort of little tutorials on macros, and certainly we could pick a few of those for future releases of the live stream. Just looking
Paul, I
think
it's a good time to ask people whether they prefer the tutorials we've been doing, between 5 and 15 minutes tutorials, and then we do all those short tips and quick tips tutorials, and it's a good occasion to ask people watching the live stream right now if they prefer 10 15 minutes tutorials, or they prefer those little pills that we release once in a while.
The graph? Yeah, I mean, yeah. So guys, see, we want to make tutorials that you want to watch. So
yeah,
we have the what we call 10-second tips, which are purely graphics. It's just a single image, 5 panels maybe, some tips. Then we have sort of 2 to 5 minute short tutorials, which I talk too much, so I find it hard to stick to those. And then we have the longer tutorials, and which can be anything up to 20 minutes and beyond. At the moment, my theory is to make shorter tutorials, but build them into courses, so you can watch them and feel like you've got a longer tutorial, or you can just watch the little bits individually. But really, just let us know which you prefer in the chat or whatever, or email us or contact us wherever. And let us know what types of tutorials you'd like to see, really, because we make them for our users, hopefully, and we would like to make them the way you'd like to watch them.
Okay, more questions.
Some to do with stairs. Stairs are, I used to be, before I went into computer graphics, I was a joiner, like a carpenter and joiner, and I used to make stairs. And from first-hand experience doing that, the geometry on those is more complicated than you would imagine, and there are lots of fiddly bits that are difficult to get right, with just based on a single spline to define the path and things like that. So this is a bit like the cars. I've got folders full of my stairs experiments to try and get them how I think they should be made, and I am warming up to a tutorial on that. So expect some input on that soon. There's a question: is it possible to create customizable tab parameters for ForestPack? I just want to use what I made. That's already there, actually. I think if it's what I think you mean. Let me show you this. So in ForestPack, you have the option to customize. It's not tabs, but you do have the option to customize the interface to remove stuff you don't normally use. So if you go into the general rollout and pop open with this little cog icon here, pop open the global settings, you can see each one of your rollouts can be turned off. So for example, I'm never going to look at about maybe I'm not doing any animation, I never use effects, I don't use the material tab. I'm going to let Forest Pack handle cameras, don't need shadows, and everything else I probably would keep, and hit OK. Then when I select this Forest Pack object again, and by the way, I am aware that Forest Pack's UI loads a bit slowly. It's loading extra slowly because I'm live streaming. It's not normally this slow on my computer, so don't judge. So you can see I've got fewer rollouts than I would have normally, which does make it much more optimized. And another thing I've got enabled there, which we introduced in Forest Pack 7, but you may not be aware of, is that this now you have the option, to automatically keep one rollout open at a time. So you see I've opened geometry. If I now open distribution, it closes geometry. If I open item editor, it closes distribution. So it's only ever keeping one rollout open at a time, so this never gets sort of unmanageably large. And that setting is also here in the global settings, and it's called open single rollout. So if you don't like that mode, you can just turn it off. But that helps keep things neat and tidy as well. Good. There's a lot of questions. We're going to have to save all these, I think. Stairs are a nightmare, all right. Okay, yeah. I'm going to move on. Keep the questions coming, though. They're really interesting.
But by the way, the questions that won't be attended today will be attended in the next one.
Yeah, definitely. We'll pick the most interesting ones. And
so right down, next one will be on March 25th.
It's basically last... Yeah. Yes. Is that a Friday or a Thursday? I can't remember.
I think it's a Thursday or Friday. We will be doing this on either Thursday or Friday. The last Thursday or Friday of each month. Yeah.
Great. This was an interesting question that started as a RailClone question and ended up a Forest Pack question. So this user had this kind of patterned metal curtain to make, and initially contacted and said, "How can I do this in RailClone?" And we did this solution, which it's a little bit tricky because you can, at the time I thought you wanted to bend around the corner and then you get into UV mapping the texture, and in RailClone that's not so easy as it is in Forest Pack. And I did make this kind of macro that shifted the UVs and things like that, but then it turns out that the user was using Corona, and there are certain limitations to do with RailClone in Corona around the UV mapping node and RailClone color, which we're waiting for the Chaos devs to implement to support those things. They're in our API, but they just need to be supported by Chaos. So what we did instead was changed gear and decided to do it in Forest Pack. And I thought it was a helpful example to show that you could just do these kinds of things in Forest Pack too, kind of basic arrays like this. So this was the kind of reference we had. It's just this kind of almost chainmail-y kind of curtain with colours on it. So I just wanted to show you that quickly. Make some plugins for Cinema 4D. Hi, mate, you can answer that one.
That's a good question. No other DCC is right now on the roadmap, so we're going to stick with 3ds Max by the moment. We are playing with Unreal Engine, bit of Unity, but mostly with Unreal Engine. But right now, there's not any project in the short term to move to another DCC, sadly.
Yeah. So this is our geometry, as again kindly provided by the user. So this we want to turn it into a curtain. So there's a few things here. I've got a curve just to make life difficult. Actually, as it turns out, it didn't need to be curved in the end, but I've got a curved version just because it's a bit more interesting. So pretty straightforward, really. I'm just going to extrude it up like so, no big deal, and make sure generate material IDs is on. So when you extrude a spline like this, if you look at the UVW unwrap, you'll find that it actually maps it quite nicely into UV space. He says, and it doesn't. Generate mapping points helps you do actually turn it on when you say turn it on. So let's try that again. Yeah. So it generates quite nice even UVs across this. So that's great because I can just use it immediately with Forest Pack. So what I'm going to do is just to pick the scatter item, which is teeny tiny down here. So I'm just going to pick that. And I'm going to go to Forest Pack. And with it selected, I'm gonna just, I'm not sure how many people have spotted this, but there's this populate from selection option here, which I've got enabled at the moment. And that basically means when I create a forest pack, either by using icon mode or clicking on a surface, it's going to immediately drop whatever I had selected initially into the geometry list. So if I click on this surface now, like this, and hit yes, then it's going to put that into the geometry list. And there you can see it is. Okay, so that just saved a little bit of time. So I've added this surface, but of course by default I've gone into UV surface mode, and from the sky, which this projects things down from above, I'm not going to see anything at all. So I need to change it to UV mode instead. And now I have one solitary object. The other thing is that I want this geometry to come out perpendicular to the face here. So instead of leaving direction mode to normal, I'm going to set to 0 so that it points straight out like that. So that sorts that out. And actually, just for this one, I'm going to change the display mode so we can see it a bit more to points cloud, so we can see a little bit more of the structure of the geometry. So that's great. So for these kinds of RailClone-y looking objects, what I'd like to do is to change the distribution mode to full. And basically what that does, distribution map, to full. And basically what that does is it creates a grid, just a grid of pieces. And what we can do is shrink this grid down so that these pieces interlock. Now at some point, as you can see, I'm going to get them interlocking vertically, but they're far too far apart horizontally. And what you want to do then is to turn off lock aspect ratio, and then you've got the ability to change the X and the Y axis separately. So now I can change this X axis look and close up these individual lines to get them to hang down in strips, like so. And that's pretty much it for making those curtains. Very, very straightforward. The only thing I would do, because this is very sort of linear at the moment, you can also come in and just add a little bit of randomness. Now, not like that, obviously, that's too much. So, but we could change this Z random rotation to -5 by -5. Maybe this Y is a little bit more. Should be 5, sorry, not -5. Just shuffle it around a little bit, make it a little bit more believable. And that will give you that kind of, more believable kind of chaotic effect. You wouldn't really randomize the scale or the translation. And then, because this is applied to a surface, the actual mapping is then very easy. So if I open the material editor, you can see here's my Corona material ready to go, and here's a map I can use here. I can use forest color to map this, and the nice thing about using forest color is that the whole link will take on the color, so you won't get any sort of half colors or links sliced in half or something like that with two different colors, which wouldn't happen in the manufacturing process. So what we do is add a forest color, general forest color, just pipe that into the base color rollout, and I think edge color as well, and then we're going to drag this texture map into the tint override slot. So you see it says tint here, turn on override, turn on get color from map, and then turn it on to as texture on surface. Now this map will then use the UV coordinates of that texture, of that surface, that it's applied to, and then it will apply that to the forest color. So by default what it's going to do is it's going to use the color blending mode, okay, and combine it with whatever color I've got in here, which is just white. So basically you won't see anything. What I want to do is just change the blending mode to normal, and then what will happen is that it will just purely use the color that's on the map, and it won't be mixing it with anything else. And that's really all you need to do there. And then again, I'm not going to render it particularly now because it could play havoc with my streaming. But if you were to render that now, you would get the effect that you can see here, where we've got individual objects mapped around. The other obvious thing you would need to do, of course, in this instance, which I didn't mention, is just to make sure that that surface doesn't actually render by going to Object Properties and turning on off renderable there. But yeah, that's that one. Any other questions? Why is the geometry probability taken so far from the geometry list with probabilities? To me, it should be right under the list as the first thing. It's an interesting point, and that's actually quite useful feedback because, as Jaime mentioned, kind of improving the user interface and the user experience of Forest Pack especially is on our agenda for this year. So any comments like that, any niggles, things that you feel like slow your workflow down, are well worth sending to us, especially at the moment. Do we save them? Yes, I think you've answered that one already. Yeah, all good. Okay. How are we doing for time, Jaime?
It's 15 minutes to go.
15?
Yeah, time flies.
Certainly does. Okay.
So I mean, we have to be keen on doing this within an hour.
Yeah, I won't go too far then. I'm going to switch to a quick RailClone one again then. This was a question, I didn't entirely understand the question. It was about multiple floors, but I think it's about how to manage, or this is how I've interpreted it, how to manage kind of multiple floors or facades or RailClone objects generally inside clipping areas without having to create multiple RailClone objects. Okay, so you've got one RailClone object, multiple splines, but you want separate controls on each spline. How do you do that? And I've just taken the example of floors really as a way of managing it, because what we're going to do is use markers. So this was a feature that was introduced in RailClone 4 and improved on in RailClone 5 to make it much more useful when working with clipping splines. Let me just open it up, the document in the background here, and then we'll have a look. Multiple floors. Start. So I'll show you a couple of ways of doing this actually. Couple of ways, and again, although floors are my example here, you could use this same principle to control, as I know people do, how windows are divided up, proportion to windows, all kinds of different things, but that's particularly the way I've seen it used so far. So let me switch to screen capture. Hello again. Right, so I'm just going to, for now, use a stock floor from the library for this demo. So I'm just going to open a new RailClone object, and we have some floors in here. You mentioned improving the libraries, didn't you, Jaime? Did you mention that? We're improving the libraries. So we've got flooring, and I'm just going to pick a spline, this one in this case, from the scene. So as you can see, one spline, one floor. Now, the easy solution to this, two solutions. I could clone this RailClone, assign it to another spline, clone it, assign it to another spline, clone it, and assign it to another spline, and that would be fine. But on a big project, if you wanted to make edits, you'd have to go and find all those different RailClone objects. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to attach all the base objects together. So I'm just going to convert this to an editable spline, and I'm just going to attach these together. So I'm going to take this little weird corner section. I mean, hopefully no one would design a building like this, but you never know. Right, okay, so attach them together. But immediately you can see why we might want separate controls, right? Because the floor direction is running the same way for every one of these rooms. And let's imagine that someone had specified that this floor that here wants to run down the long axis of this room, this one wants to run down the long axis of this room, and this one could go any which way really. How would you do that? Well, there are a few ways. So one of them you could do just by purely changing where the spline itself starts, the first vertex, and I'll show you how to set that up. So I'd open the style editor here, click on the 2D array, and in the clipping section down here you've got this auto align option, and basically this determines how we choose which direction the x-axis of this array runs on. At the moment it's none, X to XY is good for roofs and things like that, because it basically aligns it to the bottom, the lowest line of the array. And then to spline uses the vector between vertex 1 and vertex 2 in the array, in the spline, sorry. So if I change it to spline, you'll see that it starts to change direction, and that is because of the vertex 1 to vertex 2 alignment, like I say. So you can therefore change this by just changing which vertex is first. So let me right click and go back to the base object. Pick a vertex. Let's pick this one, for example. Right click and let's say make first. See, now it's running this way because this, I guess, is running counterclockwise. So we've got vertex 1 is now here, vertex 2 is down there, so it goes that way. If I choose this one as vertex 1, I'm going to have vertex 1 there, vertex 2 there. It's going to go that way. This is the easy way to remember it anyway. Right, so that works like that. Same with this one, I could do the same thing. So this one's already running the right way. Fine, all good. So this is one way of managing it. There is a slight issue with this one because although I can, let me just take this spline out actually. Might be a bit easier to see if I separate it. Just going to make a copy of this one. Come on, Max, behave yourself. There we go. I'm just trying to create a quick clone of this so we can see the vertices a little bit easier. So this one, for example, I have some options on how I can turn this. So I can certainly turn it to follow the long edge by making this one vertex 1. And I can have it running, you know, this way by making this one vertex 1. But what if I wanted it to align to this room here? In that particular instance, there's not really a way of doing it. And so this brings me to my second option, which is the ability to use markers to control the attributes of clipping splines. So I can basically add markers to each one of these splines, and I can use them to control some aspect of the graph. It's a really cool feature. Let me just delete this one. I'll just show you how to set this up first of all. So before I actually add the markers, I'm going to come and just change my RailClone graph a little bit. So you can see I've already got an exported Z rotation property. Now that lets me rotate the array. If I just set this back to none so that it's always unified in the same direction, this Z rotation property rotates the array. So if I'm 45 degrees, for example, everything turns. Okay, great. That means I've got something I can control with a marker. So I want to take that out and I want to input marker data in there. There are a couple of ways of doing this. You could either add an arithmetic node, go to expressions, add an expression. People hate expressions. Or you can go to macros, talking about favorite macros. One of mine is in the logic rollout, array attributes, and there's X and Y spline variables. So what this macro does is just exposes various attributes of the array that normally you'd only be able to get to by using expressions. And the nice thing about this is you can either use them directly, piping them into the graph, or you can start building them in with the arithmetic node without having to write your own custom expressions if that's not your thing. So what I want to do is just come down here, turn on marker data, and I'll leave it on data channel 0. Okay, so what I'm going to do is export some marker data from a RailClone spline modifier, which I'll put on this spline in a second. Which data channel? The first one, 0. I'll wire it into there. Close that. Now I'll take the base object, base object, sorry, just the base object, which is a spline, and then I'm going to add the RailClone spline modifier here. Now incidentally, I'm not going to touch on this today, but this is also how you add the banking effects that you might have seen in the RailClone 5 trailer. So these markers can be added multiples per spline, but in clipping splines, you just add one to each spline and you add it at the start of the spline. So what you just do is just click on plus to add one, and then that number, data 0, is this parameter here, user data 0. And if I change this, it should change the array. You saw that? Now, because this is only on spline 1, I'm only changing that particular room. In fact, you could label these. Let's imagine this is the lounge. You could label these so that it's very easy to know what it is you're changing later on. 0, back. I could go the other way. I could go 90 degrees, and so on and so forth. If you wanted to change them all, you click on the All button, and that mark is applied to all of the splines. But we just want it on one for now. So we could then add a few of these. So we'd add another one for spline 2, which I think is this one. Let's see if I can remember. Oh, I changed the ID. Yeah, easy mistake. Yeah, it's this one here. So now I've got control of this kind of lobby, let's say. Let's call it a lobby. So I've got control of this now. So I could now, if I wanted to, rotate it -45. Now I can go this way, look, which I couldn't do before with the other technique. I've also got easy control just by clicking back up here to pick that room and easily change it just by changing this setting. All from one place, without having to find separate RailClone objects. Without having to just kind of remember where everything is, especially if you label everything nicely to start with. And of course, I'm only using one data channel. I could be using all 9 here and have all kinds of different controls set up for aspects of this spline. You know, in here it could be changing windows, the types of floor that's in there entirely, ceilings, lights, anything you want really. You know, anything you can control in RailClone can be controlled more or less with these data channels and clipping splines. So this is a really handy little trick, and I just add one of these markers for each one of these splines. Would be 4, and I could go back in here and change these rotation settings at any time. In this example, you could use them for anything else. Grand. Okay, how we've time, Jaime?
We got 5 minutes to go.
I guess we can 5 minutes.
Extend it. Yeah, we can.
I've got one more left.
Are
there any questions?
There's a bunch of them.
Oh, there. Okay, I'll read back. Okay, just looking back at the question. Actually, I can bring them up here, I think. Okay, so yes, they're recorded. don't think I'm Mick Jagger, but thank you.
So there's a question that's been asked a bunch of times, which is, I'm doing an apartment building facade with RC, but can add floors between the building with an evenly distance. Can you show us how to do it?
Okay. Yeah. I think I know what you mean by that. So that's kind of like our parametric libraries, background buildings, I guess. So you're building a tower and you want to know how to add buildings in between. That's probably not something I can show quickly, but that could be a topic for next time, definitely. Yep. Forest Park Toolbox is the yeah, that's about potato toolbox. Yeah, look at the chap that was developing the toolbox is no longer with us, so it's slowed down a little. I will, in my spare time, have a look at it, but no, I can't promise too much. Depends how busy things are. Why doesn't Forest Color Node render with Arnold GPU? Because Arnold GPU doesn't support any native Max maps, or has very limited support for native Max maps. You have to use Arnold specific ones, and we currently don't have an Arnold specific forest color map, although I think it's on our to-do list. Hello world. Floor generator, yeah, that's kind of what we're going for here. Are there any plans for Forest Pack to put Arnold ASS files as a geometry source? That's their kind of version of proxies, isn't it? I didn't know it didn't support them, so I will look into that. If it doesn't, I'll see what needs to be done. If you can make an array of parameters which you can't, great, you could handle it. Material ID, no, I can't get my head around that at the moment. I'll have to read that slowly later. Did you answer where we are from, Jaime?
Yep.
Okay, good. Any support? Yeah, okay, so it does seem like ASS files aren't supported. I will.
Rockas is in the house, Paul.
Rockas, hey. Rockas, the developer of Forest Toolbox, is here, so you can ask him any questions. Will it be possible to link RailClone to Unreal Engine 5? RailClone is, as far as I know, still supported by Datasmith. So as soon as Datasmith supports Unreal Engine 5, we should be able to export there. And as Jaime mentioned, we've also got plans to look into supporting Unreal on our own side as well. Spanish language tutorials.
Yeah, I'm answering Spanish and everything.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, great. So I had a few more, but just to finish off, one little tip. Actually, this is a just a quick Forest Pack tip that came up the other day, and it was an interesting question for me, because it made me think about how maps work in a way that I hadn't necessarily used them before. It's not particularly exciting visually, but I found it interesting for being able to basically maintain a distribution pattern once I'd got that set, but then increase the number of trees without disrupting the pattern itself, if that makes sense.
Paul, you have the questions on the screen right now.
Have I?
Yep.
Can you suggest any tutorial? That one you mean? Can you suggest any tutorial article that could be helpful for this particular problem? And I guess that's the building one. I would say yes. One that will be released in about 2 weeks. Because we are currently working through the RailClone beginners tutorial. The next tutorial will be about building the facades, or next two will be about facade of a building using the linear generator. So you have to draw a spline around each floor plate. But the one after that is about building a 2D building, a building with a 2D generator. And so that will just be a single base spline, and that's sort of a similar approach as you're talking about. So that one that's probably the best one.
So basically, as an addition to what we said at the beginning, there's going to be the RailClone series is going to last until March in terms of tutorials. Then we will be covering exteriors and interiors workflows. That will be from April to August, and then we want to start with that advanced Archviz full workflow tutorial by the end of the year. So that's the schedule right now. I mean, we will try to accomplish, of course, but we will try our best.
Great. So this was the question that I found interesting. The user had set up a distribution pattern using the patches, or one of these patches, distribution maps, and was happy more or less with the layout, with the gaps where they wanted to be and so forth. And they'd also sort of independently used clusters to control the size of different groups of plants. So that's fine. The question was, how do I add more trees, or whatever they were, here without changing this pattern? Because of course, if I change the units, I scale the map, and I've closed up all those gaps that I rather liked. So how do you do that? And what they'd quite correctly identified from one of our tutorials was that, well, you can normally do that by increasing the threshold. But on this particular map, that threshold doesn't do anything at all. And why is that? And I can tell you why it is. It's just due to the nature of this particular bitmap. So what that threshold value does is it determines the point at which a pixel is considered bright enough to add a tree, because a distribution map is basically a pattern of planting whereby a black pixel is a gap and a white pixel, what's perceived to be a bright pixel, is a tree. And each pattern is capable of producing the number of trees of whatever that resolution of that map is. So most of these are 10 by 10, for example, so 100, maybe 100 by 100, so 10,000 trees possible within this pattern. So as you can see on the left-hand side here of this comparison between these two maps, we've got the dense map, which is this one here, and you can see the dense map has a number of points here which are of different luminances, and that's why the threshold value will work on that one, because I can control this threshold, and as it gets up to, say, a dark grey, you'll get more, or as you reduce it, down to a dark grey, you'll get more and more trees. So at 50%, like it is by default, anything below a mid-grey is a gap, and anything above a mid-grey is a tree. And if I change this to dense, you'll see this. If I reduce it, I get more trees, because I'm picking up all these dark grey ones. And if I increase it, I have fewer trees, because I'm only picking up the brighter ones. Now that does, like I say, that doesn't work with patches, because as you can see with the patches one, there's no mid, it's just purely black and white. So if you're using a map like this, how do you add more trees? You can't do it that way. But you can do it like this, basically. So what I can do is, I can open the material editor, and I can click on this bitmap input here, and open up the directory where all the bitmaps are saved, and find that bitmap, which is patches one, and just drop it into your material editor. So there it is. Now, I'll take that and put it back into this map input here. It'll change a little bit, but on the whole it stays roughly the same. So now I've got it in there, and it's kind of similar. Obviously, if I change this, then I have the same problem. I'm changing the scale of the map. But what you can do instead is change the pixel number next to it. Okay, so this is basically saying how big is the grid that I overlay on top of this bitmap in order to and look down at that to see if there's a white or a black pixel underneath. Well, what you can do is increase the size of that grid. For example, 200 there, I've doubled the number of trees. 300, trebled the number of trees, but the actual pattern has remained exactly the same. So that is my little tip for keeping the pattern but increasing the number of trees like that. And it's quite handy. The only thing I would say is, obviously, you know, these distribution maps are grid based, they always are. So if you don't want to see that grid, always go into the transform settings and turn on translation randomization and just shuffle that all those trees or whatever they are around a little bit. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. It seems like
it's been I'm going to do that again. Sorry about that, folks. I'll edit that out of the recording. So just wait for this to catch up. So right, let me just show you that again. That was not helpful. Thank you, Jaime. So just to recap that, sorry folks, this is the situation, right? I've got my patches in here. If I change the units to add more, I change the pattern. I don't want to do that. I just want the pattern to stay the same. So how can you do that? You can open the material editor. Just delete these. And click on this bitmap here, which opens where Forest Pack stores these default distribution maps. You can add your own as well, by the way. I'll find the same one that I'm using here and click open. Then, sorry, not open. Oh, it's thrown me. I'll drag it into the material editor. That's what I'm doing. Okay, there it is. Now I'll take that and pipe it into the map slot, below the bitmap slot. And when I do that, the bitmap slot essentially greys out, because now it's basically using a solid, if you can imagine, it's a solid white block. Every pixel is being represented as a tree, and it looks underneath that at this map to see if there's a white or a black pixel underneath. And if there is, then it adds a tree, or it doesn't. There's no threshold at this point because this is still a white or black map. So how do I increase the number of trees now, knowing that it still can't justice units because it still scales now my bitmap, which is in here? The way you do it is by going to the pixel setting next to that and just increasing that number, or decreasing it depending on what you want. And in there I can double the number of trees, I can triple the number of trees, I can quadruple the number of trees. That's too many trees. Just by changing that value. And essentially what I'm doing is changing kind of the resolution of the grid that's projected down on top of this map to see if there's a white or a black pixel underneath it. That's effectively what I'm doing there. And it's a nice way of being able to, you know, control the density without changing the pattern. And what I was saying there that no one else could see, because I'd forgotten to change the screen, was that this is obviously grid based, as all distribution maps are. So in order to break up the grid a little bit, go to the transform rollout, go to the translation section, just turn that on, and then you'll just break the grid up by just shuffling all the trees around a little bit. Yeah? So that was that little tip. Sorry about fumbling that at the beginning. I thought I'd managed not to forget to change the screens this time, but there you go. Hopefully that's still clear. And if it's not, let me know and we'll do it again another time. Great. Are there any questions apart from telling me that I've forgotten to do that?
Well, we are 10 minutes over the time, so.
Okay.
Guys, I mean, it's been outstanding. So thanks everyone for showing up. We are announcing the next one on Thursday, the 17th, March the 17th. So please leave your questions. We'll do it on our social media channels. So if you leave your questions in advance, we will be able to cover those and have more time to prepare the answers. So nothing else, right, Paul?
No, just a few questions if you don't mind, just jumping on those. The Unreal question was, would it be possible to take the parameters from RailClone to Unreal Engine? So that is obviously somewhere where we would need to develop that engine. Maybe. It's, it's something we'd explore. I don't think I can say much more at this point. Is it possible to simulate wind animation by adjusting rotation? That was actually for grass, in Individual Blades, you could do something by animating turbulence maps in the rotation settings. And that was actually on my list of things to get through, but we'll save it for next time. So I'll show you that next time. You can, distribution map. What am I doing? Yeah, map. Why do I get wrong scale and coordinates when using distance maps and distribution diversity slots? So that could be to do with the fact that you need to, in order to use distance textures with Forest Pack, generally speaking, the Forest Pack objects coordinates need to be centered in the world. So if you center your Forest Pack object to 0, 0, 0, you'll find you'll have much more success at getting your V-Ray distance maps to sync up correctly. Okay. Great. Apart from that, thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back next time. We've already got enough to fill it, I think, just based on the questions from this one. But if you've got any other questions in the meantime, do just let us know. Either email, forum, or social media, or comment on this video. Doesn't matter. And unless you've got anything to add, Jaime, we'll see you next time.
See you everyone in a month.
See you in a month.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Cheers.